Hi, I'm Sarah from The Upcoming. A real pleasure to have you here with us in London for the film festival. Maybe if you could begin with a brief introduction and tell us a bit about what people can expect from your film.
I'm Ondi Timoner, the director of Last Flight Home. The film is really charting the last days of my father's life. He was an incredible and extraordinary human being, and I didn't even set out to make the film. I was really actually just trying to bottle him up. Yeah, his personality, his voice. I just was terrified to forget him. So I set up cameras. He chose to die. So after living 40 years paralyzed, since an accidental stroke when he was 53 years old, he never complained. He always took himself on a cane. He had founded Air Florida, which was the fastest growing airline in the history of the world up to that point. Sort of lost it all because there were no disability protections back then, but he was the most positive, yeah, and generous human being that any of us ever knew. So the film charts his life, but also really the last days during a waiting period that exists in California. There's something called the End of Life Option Act. There's only a law allowing the right to die with dignity in 10 provinces in America. So we're lucky that that was the case in California when he realized he wasn't going to walk again. And he felt that it was time for him to go. I think in a way he felt like he could help our family more by watching over us. What happened over those days went from sort of private footage. You know, I made Dig and We Live in Public and Brand a Second Coming, and I've been making films for 30 years. For me, filming was sort of second nature. It was very much going to be private, but what happened was so profound and what we learned was so important that I felt ultimately as I was cutting it, I was sort of grieving him, and it was this most amazing journey of him being alive inside the editing system. And I realized I had to share it. And luckily, my family has been supportive of that. And it's just come out in America, and this is the UK premiere tonight here in London. So I think it'll be out here in November.
How do you think it differs when you're dealing with a subject that's so personal in terms of from a filmmaker perspective? And how would that contrast with other films you've made?
You know, making a verite film, an observational film, is really my favorite kind to make because you can never really predict what happens in life as it's unfolding. But then all of a sudden, when you look back, you can kind of connect the dots and make trace the serendipity that happens that we don't even understand at the time. You know, that started, I think my first verite film was Dig, and that was the Brian Jonestown Massacre and the Dandy Warhols over 7 years. And it was very much almost my life. I mean, I was living with them pretty much all the time. And so I was really inside the bands. And I think that's why that film feels so tangible to people. And so many people have like been influenced by that film. And here in the UK as well, the Dandy Warhols kind of took off and exploded. And by then I'd been with them for years. So it was very inside this kind of rise to fame that they had. And Brian Jonestown kept self-destructing. And it was in a way my entire 20s on film, but not with me in it. In this case, I'm actually in front of the camera too, because the cameras were secondary. It was my father dying, and I wanted to really just be with him every second. I was sort of the quarterback of his care. So, and none of us thought, I mean, my mom's in rollers in it and a moo and my brother's wearing the same shirt 3 days in a row. Like, none of us knew we were making a movie. So it feels very much like that. You know, it's so authentic. And it really, I think it's the first time in my life that filmmaking has really been there for me on an emotional level because it was almost like a safety blanket. I could know that I was capturing the most important person in my life. And therefore, I could kind of let go of all that fear of losing him because I knew something would be left. So, so yeah, it was just an incredible, I was like, I've worked so hard making all these films all these years. And this is the first time I felt like, thank God I'm a filmmaker, you know? Yeah.
Was there any moment that it did feel too overwhelming to take on this, project because of how personal it was, or was it only ever a sort of helpful, constructive, cathartic process?
It was tough to convince my sister, who's a rabbi, and she is also very private. And she feels like cameras often change, life. And so she doesn't really, she's wary of them. And here I am, this compulsive filmer all my life, like completely obsessed with the camera. Like, camera was like the right extension of my right arm until I had a baby. You know what I mean? Like, so we're very much like oil and water that way. She asked dad, I asked dad, and he said, I instinctively know you're on the right track before I set up cameras. She asked dad, how do you feel about this? And he said, I want it. And my mom really loved the idea that something of dad would be left. So she said, that's much more important than how I feel about it. And she made a decision, just forget the cameras were there. But then when I decided to make it a film that was, be public, that was another conversation. And what happened was she played it for some people and she realized that it was very healing for them. Like it kind of cracks people open and allows them to look at their own families and their own mortality and the loss of their own parents. And I think in a lot of ways it can be a guide for people to kind of cross this chasm that all of us face, Also, my dad felt like a failure because he'd lost his ability to provide for us financially, but he had provided us with everything. So we had these 15 days to convince him otherwise. And that arc of him coming to realize that he measured his life wrong and that really the true measurement of one's life is love is the real lesson of the film. So, in a way, the film is as much about how to live as how to die. And as soon as my sister experienced that, and also our mother watches the film every day to be with like every night she did for the first year, so she saw that and she thought this is incredible power. And I was just with her in New York yesterday and she was like, Ondi, I've learned so much from this, like, audience members just testifying that like the film has changed their lives. So it's just like to turn all of dad's suffering that I couldn't take away into something that helps other people like this and could change the law is truly the power of film.
Yeah, absolutely. And how does it feel to have the film here at London Film Festival?
This is my fourth. So it's returning home for me. So Dig premiered here in 2004. We live after winning Sundance, and then We Live in Public also won Sundance 2009 and came here for its UK premiere. Brand, A Second Coming about Russell Brand, had its UK premiere here as well. So this is number 4. So it really is it's a privilege, and it's a city that I love. It's country that I love. My father won the battle for Britain with Air Florida, and Air Florida was the low-cost airline that flew from the US to London. And London was the first stop in what became 17 countries outside of the US in a very short period of time, 70s into the 80s. So he hosted King Charles, like in the Polo Cup. So King Charles is in the film, like photos with, lots of British leaders, and there's a tie between us, and it's been a place that I've grown up, London. So, and we have family. There's actually people in the film from England who are coming down from Liverpool. So it's a return home for me, for sure.
And just very quickly, I mean, you obviously had phenomenal success. How do you see the opportunities now, particularly for female filmmakers? And do you think that, you're one of few, or that there's just a lot more opportunities now and there's more critical mass?
I mean, I'd say on documentary, it's always been more equal representation. I don't know if the pay is the same, though. I think women are always fighting a glass ceiling, and there's still a lot more progress to be made. However, documentaries overall have become a very big business now, which is good and bad. I don't know if you've been reading about that or hearing about that, but the quality can often be tainted, and it can start to skew a little more towards reality TV, which is something that I've always eschewed as something that I was never going to be involved in. And I'm still not, something like Last Flight Home, I feel like is a very pure documentary to find these days because I didn't need to raise money for it. I didn't need to go get money for it. I have cameras, and I didn't want a DP. I shot it. We didn't even want there to be production in a way. So, with thanks to Jewish Story Partners and then like a Mountain Film for small grants at the end, we were able to complete the film without any interference from big business and the streamers. But that's the real factor. But I think women have a greater and greater opportunity to be involved now. And I think that's a wonderful thing. But I never thought of myself as a woman. I just thought of myself as a filmmaker. Yeah.
And very quickly, do you know what subject you're going to tackle next?
I do, but I can't talk about it.
No problem.
But it's also just something that is very much from the heart.
Oh.
And that's how I want to play it.
Yeah. Lovely. Well, thank you so much for sharing all that with us.
Thank you so much.
Really enjoy your time here in London. Thank you.
Thank you.